The punishing South Dakota sun shed its last light over the prairie when Grace Thompson spotted the body. At first she thought it was just another of the distorted shadows that twilight tended to create among the undulations of the land, but the restless neighing of her horse alerted her that something was wrong. Approaching cautiously, Grace made out the shape of a fallen man. Their long black hair was stained with blood, and marks of recent fighting were visible on their traditional Lakota clothing. The man was breathing hard, but he was still alive. Grace knew that helping a Native American could have serious consequences. Tensions between settlers and indigenous people were at an all-time high after the recent Wounded Knee massacre, and his ranch was already under suspicion for harboring fugitives from the law. Still, he couldn't ignore that injured man. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, more to herself than to him, as she improvised a way to transport him to her wagon. The Thompson Ranch was about 3 miles away, hidden among hills that offered some protection from the prying eyes of the small town of Cedar Springs. Grace had inherited the estate from her late husband, Robert, and over the past 2 years had turned the place into a secret retreat for those who needed to disappear for a while. With considerable effort, he managed to hoist the injured man onto the cart. His face, even marked by pain, had a nobility that impressed her. Strong, well-defined features, which seemed to be sculpted by the prairie wind itself. When they arrived at the ranch, their only helper, Mary Wilson, a middle-aged woman who shared their rebellious spirit, was already waiting on the porch. "Good God, Grace, what did you bring this time?" "A man who needs help, Mary, just like everyone else." Together, they took the warrior to one of the back rooms, away from the front windows. As they cleaned his wounds, Grace noticed several old scars on his body, marks from a lifetime of struggle. But it was a small medallion around his neck that caught his attention. It was identical to the ones he had seen in the photos of Lakota warriors that his father used to keep. His father, Commander William Thompson, was a respected man in the American Army. Grace hadn't seen him since she ran away from home to marry Robert 5 years ago. News of her participation in the Wounded Knee massacre had reached her through the newspapers, and since then, shame and guilt had consumed her insides. For 3 days, the warrior remained unconscious, raving in his native language. Grace and Mary took turns caring for him, applying herbal poultices and keeping him hydrated. On the morning of the 4th day, he finally opened his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked in surprisingly clear English. "It's safe," Grace replied, sitting next to the bed. "My name is Grace Thompson. I found you injured on the prairie." He studied her for a few moments before responding, "I am known as the valiant spirit among my people." "Your people, the Lakota." A flash of pain crossed his gaze. "What's left of him? I'm the last of my village after Wounded Knee." Grace's heart froze. There she was, daughter of the man responsible for the death of this warrior's family, nursing his wounds. Fate had a cruel sense of irony. "I'm sorry," was all he could say, feeling the weight of a secret that now seemed even more impossible to reveal. In the days that followed, as Espirito Valente regained his strength, Grace discovered a depth in him that increasingly intrigued her. He spoke little, but each word carried the weight of the ancestral wisdom of his people. Sometimes she would find him on the back porch, watching the horizon with a distant gaze, as if he could see beyond the hills, beyond time. His presence at the ranch, however, did not go unnoticed. Rumors began to circulate in Cedar Springs, and Grace noticed hostile looks when she went into town to get supplies. Local Sheriff Augustus Miller, a man known for his anti-Indian stance, began making frequent visits to the property. "Miss Thompson," he said during one of these visits, "it has come to my ears that you are harboring an Indian." "I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff," Grace replied firmly. "As you can see, I'm alone here with Mary." Miller circled the porch, his piercing gaze examining every detail. "You know, your father is a great man. It would be a shame if he found out that his only daughter is fraternizing with the enemy." The mention of her father made Grace's stomach turn. "My father has nothing to do with my decision, Sheriff. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." At night, as she changed Brave Spirit's bandages, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a fine line between two worlds. On the one hand, the full weight of their heritage and the expectations of pioneering society. On the other, a man who represented everything his father had tried to destroy. "Why do you help me?" asked Espirito Valente, breaking the silence. "You know this could get you in trouble." Grace hesitated, her hands pausing for a moment over the bandage. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because maybe I'm trying to fix something that can't be fixed." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Grace felt that something bigger than themselves was in motion. A story that began with blood and pain, but that maybe, just maybe, could end differently. The sun was setting over the South Dakota horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and gold. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled into the coming night, reminding everyone that in these wild lands, fate had its own plans. News of the presence of a Lakota warrior on the Thompson Ranch spread through Cedar Springs like wildfire. Residents, still haunted by the echoes of the Wounded Knee massacre, began locking their doors early and exchanging suspicious glances as Grace passed down the town's main street. Inside the ranch, tension grew differently. As Espirito Valente regained his strength, Grace found herself increasingly fascinated by his presence. She secretly watched him as he performed his morning rituals, greeting the rising sun with ancient words that she didn't understand, but that touched something deep in her soul. "You have questions in your eyes," he said one morning, catching her by surprise as she watched him from the porch. "But he's afraid of the answers." Grace felt her face burn. "How did you survive the massacre?" The question escaped him before he could contain it, and he immediately regretted it when he saw the shadow that crossed his face. "I was hunting," he replied after a long silence. "When I returned, I found only ashes and bodies. My wife, my little son, my elders." His voice trailed off, but his eyes remained dry, as if the tears had dried up long ago. The weight of guilt threatened to suffocate Grace. His father, Commander Thompson, had led that attack. In the letters he sent, he justified his actions as necessary for the civilization of the territory. How could she carry the blood of the man responsible for so much pain? Mary, who had been watching their interaction with growing concern, pulled Grace into the house. "Girl, you're playing with fire," he warned in a low voice. "I saw how you look at him, and how he looks back. This can only end in tragedy." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mary," Grace replied, but her racing heart betrayed her. The afternoon brought another unwanted visit from Sheriff Miller, this time accompanied by 2 deputies. "Miss Thompson," he called from the fence, "we need to search your property. We have reason to believe you are harboring a murderer." Grace felt her blood run cold. Espirito Valente was in the barn, where he used to meditate in the afternoons. "Do you have a warrant, Sheriff?" "Don't play with me, lady. Your father wouldn't be happy to know he's protecting savages." "My father doesn't run my life anymore," she replied, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Come back with a warrant, Sheriff Miller." When the men finally left, Grace ran to the barn. He found Espirito Valente standing, holding an improvised bow. "I will not allow you to take any more risks because of me," he said. "I must leave tonight." "No!" The vehemence in her own voice surprised her. "He's not fully recovered yet, and there are patrols everywhere." He got closer, and Grace felt her heart race. The aroma of leather and herbs emanating from him was intoxicating. "Why do you care so much about my safety?" Because, she hesitated, torn between the truth that consumed her and the fear of losing him. Because you deserve to live. That night, as a storm brewed on the horizon, Grace couldn't sleep. The thunder seemed to echo the beats of his confused heart. He got up and went to the kitchen to get water, only to find Espirito Valente sitting at the table, examining the medallion he was carrying. It was my father's, he explained, noting her interest. It's been passed down from generation to generation in our family. Now, I'm the last one to carry it. Grace approached, mesmerized by the play. He had seen that pattern before, in the photographs his father kept like war trophies. The thought made her shudder. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, sitting down next to him. But before he could continue, horses' hooves sounded outside. Mary burst into the kitchen. "Night's approaching! Lots of them!" Grace pulled Brave Spirit by the hand, guiding him to a trap door hidden under the living room carpet. "This place has saved many lives," he quickly explained. "Be silent no matter what you hear." Their eyes met for an intense moment before she closed the trap door. Grace's heart was torn between fear of discovery and guilt for hiding not only the man, but also the truth about her identity. The Knights were led by a bounty hunter known as Snake Eyes, famous for his cruelty towards the natives. Grace faced them on the porch, while Mary remained strategically close to the trap door, sweeping the floor as if it were just another ordinary night. "We are looking for a Lakota warrior," Snake Eyes said, his scarred face illuminated by the lightning. "They pay well for your head." "There's no one here but 2 women trying to survive," Grace replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. The men ransacked the house, breaking objects and scattering belongings. Grace prayed they wouldn't notice the slight unevenness in the living room carpet. Every minute seemed like an eternity. When they finally left, leaving a trail of destruction, Grace found herself crying. He wasn't sure if it was from relief, fear, or the growing certainty that his feelings for Espirito Valente had transformed into something he could no longer deny or control. When he opened the trapdoor, he found him sitting in the shadows, holding the medallion like a talisman. "Now you understand why you must leave," he said softly. "No," she replied, walking down the steps to sit next to him. "Now I understand why you must stay. I can't let you face this alone." Thunder roared again outside, but within that hiding place, in the space between 2 heartbeats, something changed irrevocably. Grace knew she needed to tell the truth about her father, but at that moment all she could do was hold Brave Spirit's hand in the darkness, feeling the weight of an uncertain future weighing down on them both. The storm continued into the night, as if the sky itself understood the turmoil in their hearts. Somewhere among the lightning and thunder, 2 worlds that should never meet began to intertwine, defying the laws of men and the course of history. Dawn brought with it a heavy silence to the Thompson Ranch. The damage from the nighttime invasion was still visible, furniture out of place, broken crockery scattered around, and muddy boot prints on the floor. But it wasn't the property damage that troubled Grace. It was the growing weight of the secret she carried. Spirit Valente sat on the back porch, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. The tribal medallion glowed against her chest in the morning light, a constant reminder of the truth Grace needed to reveal. She approached, each step feeling as if she were walking on hot coals. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "Something about my father." Before he could continue, the sound of approaching hooves interrupted his confession. Mary came running out of the kitchen, her face pale with worry. "It's Commander Thompson. He's coming with a military patrol." The blood ran cold in Grace's veins. Her father, the man she hadn't seen in 5 years, the one responsible for the massacre that destroyed Espirito Valente's life, was arriving. Fate seemed to laugh at his attempted confession. Quickly, she whispered to Spirit Brave, guiding him back to the basement. "Don't make a sound no matter what." His eyes met hers, filled with a silent understanding that made her feel even more guilty. "You fear this approaching man," he observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she admitted, closing the trapdoor. "More than you know." Commander William Thompson was an imposing figure even at the age of 60. His impeccable uniform and rigid posture exuded authority as he dismounted his horse. Grace forced herself to remain steady on the porch, even though her heart was beating wildly. "Grace!" His voice was like cold steel. "The years haven't made her any more sensible, I see." "Father," she replied, keeping her chin up, "to what do I owe the honor?" "Don't play with me, girl. It's come to my attention that you're harboring one of the savages that escaped from Wounded Knee." He walked forward, his eyes scanning the house. "Where is he?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Grace replied, holding his gaze. "As you can see, there's only me and Mary here." The commander made a gesture, and his men began to search the property. Grace silently prayed that they wouldn't find the trap door, aware that Brave Spirit could hear every word exchanged between her and her father. "You've always been stubborn," the commander continued, his voice softer now, "just like your mother. But this is bigger than your rebellious tendencies. That Indian is dangerous. He killed 2 of my men before he disappeared." Grace felt the world spin. He looked at his father, searching for any sign of lies in his words, but found only the same unyielding certainty as always. Would it be possible? Had the Brave Spirit killed him? "Those men attacked unarmed women and children," she responded, finding strength in her own indignation. "How can you talk about danger when you were the one who ordered a massacre?" A slap cut through the air, but Grace didn't move. She faced her father, feeling her face burn where his hand had hit her. Mary let out a small scream from the kitchen door. "Don't you dare question my actions," he growled. "I did what was necessary to bring civilization to these wild lands. If you are protecting that murderer, you will be considered a traitor." The soldiers returned without finding anything, and Commander Thompson remounted his horse. "I'll be watching, Grace. Don't force me to choose between my duty and my daughter." Only when the dust settled and the hooves were no longer audible did Grace allow herself to tremble. Mary hugged her, murmuring words of comfort as she guided her inside. When he opened the trap door, he found Espirito Valente standing in the shadows, his face an indecipherable mask. "Now you know who I am," he said, "daughter of the man who ordered the death of my people." "I was going to tell you," Grace hurried to say, descending the steps. "This morning, before your father arrived looking for his men's killer." His voice didn't show anger, just deep sadness. "Yes, I killed those soldiers. They laughed as they shot our children." Grace felt hot tears running down her face. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For what my father did. For what they did to his people. I carry this guilt every day." "It's not your fault," he replied, surprising her by gently touching her face, where the slap had left a red mark. "But now I understand why you were afraid to tell me the truth." His touch was gentle, contrasting with all the violence that surrounded them. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand. "What do we do now?" "You've already done more than you should have," he said, walking away. "Tonight, I must leave. Your father will not rest until he finds me, and I cannot allow you to come between us." "No!" The word escaped like a choked scream. "There are others like you, survivors. I can help you find them. There are safe places." "And risk your life even more?" He shook his head. "No, I've seen enough death." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and silent preparations. Mary gathered provisions, while Grace fought the urge to beg him to stay. When the night arrived, heavy and moonless, Espirito Valente was ready to leave. In the darkness of the barn, Grace held his hands one last time. "Be careful," he whispered, his voice breaking, "and know that not all white people are like my father. Some of us want to do right." "I know that now," he replied, leaning down to touch her forehead with his, a gesture of intimacy that made Grace's heart race. "You showed me that there is hope, even in the darkest hours." When he disappeared into the night, Grace remained in the barn for a long time, her thoughts a storm of conflicting emotions. The ranch had never seemed so empty, so silent. But something inside her had changed. The truth, as painful as it was finally exposed. And with it came the certainty that his life would never be the same. Espirito Valente's departure left a void at the Thompson Ranch that not even hard work could fill. Grace spent the next few days in a state of constant unrest, torn between worry about her whereabouts and fear of the consequences her help might bring. Sheriff Miller intensified his visits, always accompanied by different deputies, as if trying to catch Grace off guard. His questions became more and more incisive, and his looks more threatening. "You know, Miss Thompson," he said during one such visit, "we found fresh tracks in the hills to the north, tracks that lead directly to your property." Grace kept her expression neutral, even though her heart was beating fast. "As I said before, Sheriff, there is no one here but me and Mary. If you found tracks, they must be from hunters who passed through these lands." Miller approached, his whiskey breath making Grace flinch instinctively. "Your father authorized me to use any means necessary to find that savage. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider your position?" "My father has no authority over my property," she replied, lifting her chin in defiance, "and I suggest you keep your distance, Sheriff." After her departure, Mary found Grace in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to prepare some tea. "Child," the older woman said gently, "you need to be careful. The sheriff is not a man to make empty threats." "I can't just pretend like nothing happened, Mary," Grace replied, tears of frustration shining in her eyes. "Not after knowing the truth, after knowing him." A sudden noise in the barn interrupted the conversation. The two women exchanged apprehensive glances before Grace grabbed a lamp and headed out to investigate. Her heart almost stopped when she recognized the familiar silhouette leaning against one of the walls. "Brave spirit," she whispered, running to him. "What happened? Why did you come back?" He was panting, holding his side where a makeshift bandage was stained red. "I found other survivors," he said with difficulty, "but we were ambushed. They need help." Grace helped him sit on the straw, her touch gentle but firm as she examined the wound. "How many are there? Where are they?" "5. 2 women, 3 children," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. "They are hiding in the caves of Raven's Hill, but your father's men are surrounding the area." The dilemma that presented itself was devastating. Helping more survivors would mean openly defying her father and risking not only her own life, but also that of Mary and everyone involved. On the other hand, how could I abandon innocent children to their fate? "Mary," called Grace, making her decision, "prepare the secret room in the barn and bring clean bandages." As she tended to Brave Spirit's wounds, Grace couldn't shake the thoughts of how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, she was just another widow trying to keep her ranch going. Now he was at the center of a battle that was both personal and historic. "Why are you really back?" she asked softly, her hands pausing over the freshly done bandage. "I could have sent someone else, someone who wasn't as wanted." Brave Spirit covered her hand with his own. "Because I trust you, Grace Thompson. Even though you are the daughter of who you are, your heart is different. You see beyond the colors and the blood." His touch sent shivers down her spine, and Grace had to fight the urge to move closer. How are we going to rescue the others? Sheriff Miller has men everywhere." "I know paths they don't know," he replied, "but I will need your help to create a distraction." They came up with a plan overnight. Mary would leave for the city the next morning, spreading rumors about suspicious movements in the direction away from the caves. Grace would prepare her wagon with supplies, ready to leave at the first sign. "If we get caught," Grace began, but Brave Spirit interrupted her with a gesture. "Then we will die knowing that we tried to do right," he said simply. "My people have a saying, 'It is better to live one day as a free wolf than 100 years as a chained dog.'" The closeness between them was electrifying, filled with unspoken words and feelings that defied the barriers of their different origins. Grace could feel the heat of his body, hear his soft breathing, see the shadows dancing across his face in the lamplight. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper, "not of death, but of failing those children, of failing you." Brave Spirit raised his hand to touch her face, his touch as light as a feather. "You are already stronger than you know, Grace. Your courage shines like the northern stars, guiding the way in the darkness." The moment was interrupted by Mary, who hurriedly entered the barn. "Night's approaching," she warned in a low voice. Grace and Braveheart quickly separated, and she guided him to the hiding place in the hay. His heart beat like a war drum as he closed the secret door, aware that every decision from now on could mean life or death. The night advanced slowly, populated by restless shadows and silent promises. Somewhere in the hills, Lakota children waited for salvation, while on the Thompson Ranch, a woman faced the biggest choice of her life, between family duty and what her heart knew was right. Dawn would bring with it new dangers and challenges, but for now, in the darkness of the barn, two different worlds met in a moment of mutual understanding, defying the fates others had written for them. The plan to rescue the Lakota survivors began to take shape with the first rays of the sun. Mary set out for Cedar Springs before dawn, prepared to spread rumors about sightings of Indian warriors near the North Dakota border, in the opposite direction from the Crow Hill Caves. Grace and Espirito Valente worked silently in the barn, loading the wagon with essential supplies, blankets, non-perishable food, water, and medicine. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed risk against necessity. "The kids," Grace asked as she wrapped extra bandages, "how are they?" "Scared," he replied, his voice thick with regret. "The youngest is only 4 summers old. She lost her mother at Wounded Knee." Her eyes met Grace's, and she saw in them the weight of memories too painful to express in words. The sound of approaching hooves caused them both to freeze. Grace peered through the crack in the barn, and her heart almost stopped. It was her father, riding alone toward the ranch. "Quickly," she whispered, pushing Brave Spirit into hiding. "Don't make a sound no matter what." Commander Thompson dismounted with the grace of a much younger man, his keen eyes scanning the surrounding terrain. Grace forced herself to walk calmly to the porch, aware that every gesture could betray her. "2 visits in less than a week," she said, keeping her voice steady. "To what do I owe the honor?" "I came as a father, not as a commander," he replied, climbing the porch steps. There was something different about his posture, a softness Grace hadn't seen in years. "Can we talk inside?" In the living room, still messy from the previous invasion, Commander Thompson looked out of place, as if his military boots didn't belong in that domestic environment. Grace waited, tense, as he chose his words. "Your mother would have been proud," he began, surprising her. "The ranch, how you kept it going all by yourself after Robert died." "Mom would have understood why I help people in need," Grace replied, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "She always taught us to see beyond appearances." "Yes, she was like that," her father agreed, a rare smile softening his hard features. "That's why I fell in love with her, her ability to see kindness where others saw only savagery." Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. "Then why, Father? Why wounded knee? Why order the deaths of innocent women and children?" Commander Thompson walked to the window, his back rigid as if carrying an invisible weight. "War changes men, Grace. It hardens their hearts until they can no longer distinguish between right and wrong. I came today because—" He hesitated, turning to face her. "Because I don't want the same thing to happen to you." "What do you mean?" "The men are closing in on the hills. We know there are survivors hiding there, and orders are orders." His eyes met hers with intensity. "If you're helping them, Grace, you need to stop now. I can't protect you if you're found out." Grace's heart was beating so loudly that she was afraid her father might hear it. In the barn, Brave Spirit was hiding less than 100 yards away, and in the caves, innocent children waited for salvation. "There are times, Father," she said slowly, "when we have to choose between obeying orders and obeying our conscience." Commander Thompson closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words had physically hurt him. "You're just like your mother," he repeated, more softly this time. Maybe that's why I can't let you get hurt." He walked to the door, stopping before leaving. "There will be a special patrol tonight, concentrated on the west side of the hills. I suggest you keep your doors locked and don't go out after dark." His gaze met hers one last time, charged with meaning. "Did you understand?" Grace understood the hidden message in her father's words. He was giving her a chance, a small window of opportunity. "Yes, Father, I understand perfectly." When the sound of her horse's hooves faded into the distance, Grace ran to the barn. He found Espirito Valente already out of hiding, his face a mask of contained emotions. "Your father just gave us our best chance," he said, taking her hands in his. "But the risk is still great. Are you sure you want to continue with this?" Grace intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "Some choices aren't really choices," he replied. "They're just what we need to do to keep living with ourselves." They spent the next few hours finalizing their preparations. Mary returned with news that her rumors had had an effect. Several of the sheriff's men were already riding north, following false leads. As dusk began to paint the sky red and gold, Grace guided the wagon out of the ranch, with Spirit Valente hidden under a pile of hay. The path to the caves would be dangerous, but she had memorized every curve and elevation of the terrain during her solitary rides in recent years. "No matter what happens tonight," said Brave Spirit softly, emerging from the hay when they were far enough from the ranch, "know that your heart is stronger than the steel of any weapon." Grace kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her heart danced with his words. Somewhere in the hills, frightened children waited for salvation, and she had made her choice. Between his father and his conscience, between duty and love, he had chosen the most difficult path, but the only one he could follow. Night was falling quickly over the South Dakota prairies, bringing with it promises of danger and hope. And as the wagon rolled silently toward the hills, Grace Thompson knew that regardless of the outcome, this would be the night that changed everything. Darkness embraced the wagon as Grace and Brave Spirit advanced silently towards the Crow Hills. The winding path was lit only by a crescent moon, which occasionally hid behind wandering clouds, as if it too participated in its secret mission. "Stop here," Brave Spirit whispered, lightly touching Grace's shoulder. "The rest of the way must be done on foot. The caves are hidden behind those rock formations." Grace guided the wagon into a small aspen grove where the shade trees offered natural cover. Her movements were deliberate and silent, as Espirito Valente had taught her. Every broken branch could mean discovery. Every careless sound could cost lives. "How will we know if it's safe?" she asked, helping him unload the essential supplies they would be carrying. "The spirits of our ancestors will guide us," he replied, his dark eyes shining in the dim light. Then, surprising Grace, he removed the locket from around her neck and placed it in her hands. "Keep this. If anything happens to me, give it to the children. They will need to know who they are." The weight of the medallion seemed to multiply in his hands. "Nothing will happen to you," she stated, although her voice shook slightly. "We'll make it." They began to climb the rocky slope, each step calculated to avoid loose rocks that might give away their presence. The wind rustled between the rocks, creating ghostly sounds that made Grace occasionally startle. Brave Spirit moved like a shadow in front of him, his footsteps so light that they barely disturbed the dust on the ground. Suddenly he stopped, raising a hand in warning. In the silence of the night, Grace heard distant voices, the clatter of hooves against rocks. The patrol was closer than they had imagined. "This way," he murmured, pulling her into a crevice between the rocks. The space was tight, forcing them to get dangerously close. Grace could feel the heat of his body, hear his controlled breathing, feel the slight tremor of his tense muscles, ready to act, if necessary. The voices got closer. Grace recognized Sheriff Miller's gruff tone among them. "They must be around here somewhere. The commander said the west area would be clear, so this is where we'll find them." Grace's heart skipped a beat. Had his father lied? Or was Miller acting on his own? Thoughts swirled in her mind as she pressed herself even closer against Brave Spirit, trying to blend into the shadows. The minutes dragged on like hours until the voices finally began to drift away. Only when silence reigned again did they dare to move. "We need to hurry," said Espirito Valente. "They can come back." They continued climbing, now with renewed urgency. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached an opening partially hidden by withered bushes. Brave Spirit made a soft sound, like the hooting of an owl, and waited. Moments later, a small figure emerged from the shadows, a girl no more than 12 years old, her large, frightened eyes glowing in the darkness. Silent Moon. Brave Spirit greeted her in a low voice. "Is everyone okay?" The girl nodded, then her curious gaze fell on Grace. Instinctively, he took a step back. "She's a friend," assured Spirit Brave in the Lakota language, which Grace was beginning to understand a little. "He came to help us." Inside the cave, other figures materialized from the shadows. An older woman carrying a baby, 2 small children clinging to her skirts, and another young woman with a boy about 6 years old. Their faces showed the signs of fear and deprivation, but also an unshakable dignity that touched Grace's heart deeply. As they handed out water and food, Grace watched as the Brave Spirit interacted with the children, his natural kindness emerging in every gesture, every soft word of comfort. It was hard to imagine that this same man had killed soldiers at Wounded Knee. But then, she thought, war changes everyone. "We need to move them tonight," he said, returning to his side. "There is a safe place 2 days' travel from here, a hidden village where other survivors have gathered." "But how? The patrol is still around, and there are too many for the wagon." A gunshot rang out in the night, followed by screams and the sound of rolling stones. Grace felt her blood run cold when she realized they were coming from the direction where they had left the cart. "They found our transport," Brave Spirit muttered, his expression hardening. "Now they know someone is helping." "Grace!" Sheriff Miller's voice resounded among the rocks. "We know it's there. Your father can't protect you this time." The children shrank deeper into the shadows, while the women exchanged apprehensive glances. Grace felt the weight of the locket against her chest, where she had hung it, and an iron determination came over her. "Is there another way out?" asked Espirito Valente. "Yes, but it is dangerous. A path through the caves that leads to the other side of the mountain. Few know. Then that's where we'll go, she decided. You guide the women and children. I will distract Miller and his men. No. The intensity of his refusal surprised her. It's very dangerous. They will show no mercy. Grace touched his face gently, feeling the roughness of his beard beneath her fingers. I'm Commander Thompson's daughter. They won't dare hurt me. And you need to save your people. Their gazes met in the dim light of the cave, years of history and prejudgments crumbling into the space between their hearts. Then, to everyone's surprise, Espirito Valente pulled her towards him and kissed her. A desperate kiss, full of unspoken promises and unconfessed fears. Come back to me, he whispered in Lakota. I'll be back, she promised in the same language, the words strange in her mouth but true in her heart. As she watched Brave Spirit lead the group deeper into the cave, Grace took a deep breath and prepared to face her pursuers. Outside, more gunshots rang out in the night, but she no longer felt fear, just a crystal-clear certainty that, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Night enveloped the Raven Hills in a blanket of tension as Grace emerged from the cave, her heart beating a determined rhythm. The screams of Sheriff Miller and his men echoed among the rocks, mixing with the distant howls of coyotes. Behind him, the soft sound of the footsteps of the Brave Spirit and the Lakota refugees disappeared into the depths of the mountain. Grace Thompson, Miller shouted again. Show up now and maybe we can resolve this peacefully. She took a deep breath, adjusting the Brave Spirit medallion under her blouse. With firm steps, he walked to a rocky ledge where he would be seen. I'm here, Sheriff, he replied, keeping his voice steady, alone and unarmed. The beams of light from the men's flashlights converged on her, momentarily blinding her. Grace made out at least half a dozen silhouettes moving among the rocks below. Come down here, lady, Miller ordered. Your father will be very disappointed to learn that his only daughter is a traitor. My father taught me to fight for what I believe in, she replied, carefully beginning to descend. Each step was calculated not only to maintain his balance, but to move the men away from the cave entrance. Even if sometimes that means fighting him. One of the deputies approached to grab her as soon as she reached the ground, but Miller stopped him with a gesture. Where's the Indian, Grace? What about the others you're helping? There is no one but me, she replied, holding his gaze. I came to check my wagon after hearing the shots. What did you do with it, by the way? Miller smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your wagon is fine, for now, but we found enough provisions to feed more than one person. Want to try again? A sudden gunshot cut through the night, followed by screams coming from the direction opposite the caves. Miller's men turned, confused, pointing their weapons at the shadows. Boss, there's movement down there, shouted one of the deputies. Grace felt a wave of relief. Mary must have gotten help from some of the fugitives they had previously sheltered at the ranch. The plan was working. Split up, Miller ordered, his face contorted with rage. Johnson and Peters, take the girl. The rest, me. While most of the men disappeared into the darkness, Grace watched her two guards carefully. Johnson was young, probably on his first job as a deputy. Peters, on the other hand, was a veteran known for his brutality. Do you know what they do to traitors, girl? Asked Peters, approaching with a malicious smile. Especially those who lie with savages? Watch your tongue, Peters, Grace warned, her voice icy. I'm still Commander Thompson's daughter. Your father isn't here right now, he replied, reaching out to touch his face. The sound of hooves thundering down the hillside interrupted the moment. A mounted figure emerged from the shadows, and Grace immediately recognized her father's military stance. Get away from her, Peters, Commander Thompson thundered, dismounting nimbly. Now, The two deputies instantly backed away, their expressions a mixture of surprise and fear. The commander crossed the space between them in long strides, his eyes fixed on Grace. "Father?" she began, but he silenced her with a gesture. "Where are they, Grace?" he asked in a low voice, just for her to hear. She hesitated, studying her father's face. There was something different in his expression, not the usual military toughness, but something more human. "Why do you want to know?" she replied with another question. "Because I need to make sure they get to the north safely," he said, completely surprising her. "Miller is acting on his own, against my direct orders. He wants to make a name for himself by hunting down the last Lakota." Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. "Father, your mother would be proud of you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have realized I was turning into the kind of man she most despised." More gunshots echoed in the distance, followed by screams and the sound of fleeing horses. The commander turned to the deputies. "You two, join the others, now." When they were alone, Grace touched her father's arm. "They're following a safe path through the caves. They'll come out on the other side of the mountain." "Well," he nodded, "then I must keep Miller occupied on this side for as long as necessary." He hesitated, then continued. "The warrior, brave spirit. He means a lot to you, doesn't he?" Grace felt the weight of the locket against her chest. "Yes," he admitted. "He showed me that there are other paths besides hatred and revenge." The commander closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of those words. "Go," he said finally. "There's a horse tied up behind those rocks. Take the east path. It connects with the cave exit about 5 miles further." "But what about you?" "I have a lot to answer for my actions," he replied with a sad smile. "Maybe helping you guys is a first step." Grace hugged her father tightly, smelling the familiar smell of leather and gunpowder that she had always associated with him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go," he repeated, gently pushing her away. "And Grace, tell him I'm sorry. For everything." She nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Running to where the horse was hidden, Grace quickly mounted and headed in the direction her father indicated. Behind her, she heard his voice thundering orders, organizing a search in the opposite direction. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, lighting his path as he galloped across the prairie. The medallion beat against her chest in rhythm with the horse's hooves, like a second heart guiding her through the night. Somewhere ahead, Espirito Valente and the others would emerge from the caves, carrying with them the hopes of a people who refused to disappear. And Grace Thompson, daughter of the man who once tried to destroy them, rode out to join them, no longer torn between two worlds, but part of something new that was being born in the wilds of South Dakota. Dawn found Grace riding across the prairie, her eyes alert for signs of the exit from the caves where Brave Spirit and the Lakota refugees would emerge. The tribal medallion still beat against his chest in time with his gallop, like a talisman guiding his path across the vastness of South Dakota. The first rays of sunlight painted the horizon crimson when she spotted movement among the rocks. His heart leapt as he recognized the tall, dignified figure of the Brave Spirit leading the small group of survivors. The children looked exhausted, but their eyes shone with a determination that touched Grace. "We thought she had been captured," he said, as she dismounted and ran towards him. His face showed signs of fatigue from the night's journey through the caves, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. "My father," Grace replied, still barely believing her words. "He helped us. He's keeping Miller and his men busy on the other side of the mountain." The surprise on Brave Spirit's face was quickly replaced by understanding. "Sometimes spirits work in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Even the most hardened hearts can find their way back to the truth." Silent Moon, the young Lakota, approached Grace shyly. "You're back," he said in his halting English. As promised. Grace smiled, touched by the girl's confidence. Yes, and I brought news. There is a safe camp awaiting you further north, where other survivors have gathered. But first we need to rest, Espirito Valente intervened, observing the exhausted women and children. I know a place near here, hidden among the oaks. The refuge was a small valley protected by rock formations with a spring of crystal-clear water sprouting between the rocks. While the women organized an impromptu camp and the children finally relaxed enough to sleep, Grace and Espirito Valente stood guard at the entrance to the valley. The locket, he said, noticing the chain around her neck. You kept it well. Grace carefully removed it, holding it toward her. It belongs to you, to your people. But Espirito Valente closed his hand over hers, keeping the medallion between them. Maybe it belongs to both of us now, as a symbol that the past need not determine the future. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of gunshots. Grace felt her body tense. Even here, they weren't completely safe. Miller must have discovered the trick, she murmured. You won't give up easily. Neither do we, replied Espirito Valente, his voice full of determination. Your father bought us time, but we must leave at nightfall. The way to the northern camp is long and dangerous. The following hours were dedicated to preparations. Grace shared her knowledge of military patrols and surveillance routes, information that her father had missed over the years. Espirito Valente, in turn, taught her to read the signs of the land, footprints, broken branches, wind patterns that could reveal the approach of pursuers. How will we know if we've reached the right place? Asked Grace, as they studied a makeshift map he had drawn in the dirt. Look for 3 peaks that look like arrows pointing to the sky, he replied. The elders say they were placed there by the spirits to guide our people in times of need. The sun was starting to set when they heard the sound of approaching hooves. Grace and Espirito Valente exchanged tense glances, but relaxed when they recognized Mary Wilson emerging from the trail, riding one of the ranch's horses. Grace, called the older lady, dismounting with difficulty. Your father. He's hurt. The world seemed to spin beneath Grace's feet. What happened? Miller found out he was helping us, Mary explained, still panting. There was a fight. The commander is hiding in the old abandoned chapel, but he needs medical help. Grace felt the conflict tear at her heart. Her father needed her, but the refugees also depended on her help to get north to safety. Go, said Espirito Valente, surprising her. Your father risked everything to give us this chance. Now it's our turn to help him. But what about you? The way... I know the path as I know the lines of my own hand, he replied with a soft smile. And I won't be alone. He gestured toward the Lakota women, who were watching the scene with determined expressions. We are a strong people, Grace. We survive because we stand together. Tears glistened in Grace's eyes as she realized she would need to say goodbye. His whole being screamed against separation, but he knew it was the right thing to do. I'll come back for you, she promised, her voice cracking with emotion. When my father is safe, I will head north. And I'll be waiting, he replied, touching her face gently, where 3 stone arrows point to the sky. His goodbye kiss was brief but intense, full of promises and hopes. The children, especially Silent Moon, hugged Grace tightly, their small hands conveying more gratitude than words could express. Mounting again, Grace took one last look at the group, Brave Spirit standing tall against the evening sky, the Lakota women and children around her, like a family reborn from the ashes of Wounded Knee. The medallion still hung around his neck, now a symbol not just of heritage, but of a future no one could have predicted. May the spirits protect you, said Brave Spirit in Lakota, his words carried on the twilight wind. And may they guide your steps, she replied in the same language, her pronunciation imperfect but sincere. As she rode alongside Mary toward the abandoned chapel, Grace felt that something fundamental had changed within her. She was no longer just Commander Thompson's daughter, nor just the rebellious widow who harbored fugitives. She was someone new, forged in the fire of love and courage, determined to build bridges where others had built walls. The sun disappeared over the horizon, painting the sky with colors that resembled a tribal medallion. Somewhere to the north, 3 rocky peaks waited like silent sentinels, promising refuge for those who dared to dream of a different world. The abandoned chapel stood against the night sky like a shadow from the past, its wooden walls worn down by time and neglect. Grace and Mary dismounted in silence, their eyes alert for any suspicious movement nearby. The Brave Spirit medallion hung heavy around his neck as a constant reminder of everything that was at stake. "This way," Mary whispered, guiding her to a side entrance partially hidden by withered bushes. "Your father is in the basement." The inside of the chapel smelled of mold and rotting wood. Grace followed Mary through what was once the altar, to a narrow staircase that led underground. By the dim light of a lamp, they found Commander Thompson leaning against the wall, his uniform stained with blood. "Grace," he murmured, trying to sit up straighter. "I shouldn't have come." "Miller." "Shh," she interrupted, kneeling beside him to examine the wound. One bullet had gone through his shoulder, and another had hit him in the right side of the abdomen. "We need to get him to a doctor." "No," he replied firmly. "Miller will have men watching all the doctors in the area. Also—" He coughed, a pained expression crossing his face. "I need you to listen." Grace began cleaning the wounds with the supplies Mary had brought, as her father continued, "What I did at Wounded Knee, there is no justification. I spent years telling myself it was necessary, that it was for the greater good. But your mother—" Her voice trailed off. "She would have despised me for what I became. Father, please preserve your strength." "No." He held your hand, his eyes feverish but determined. "I need you to understand. When I saw you defend that Lakota warrior, I saw your mother in you, the same courage, the same ability to see beyond hate and fear. It was like she was giving me one last chance to do the right thing." Silent tears streamed down Grace's face as she worked on the bandages. Mary went up to guard the entrance, leaving father and daughter alone with their long silenced truths. "Miller and his men will not give up," the commander continued. "They will come after you and the Lakota, but I have a plan." Grace paused her work, watching her father carefully. Even injured and weakened, his military mind still worked as it always did. "There's an army detachment camped 2 days away," he explained, "commanded by Colonel Harrison, a decent man who has always opposed the treatment of natives. If we can send a message—" A noise above interrupted them. Mary hurriedly went downstairs. "Night's approaching," she whispered urgently. Grace felt her heart speed up. "How many?" "At least a dozen. Miller's with them." Commander Thompson tried to get up, but Grace stopped him. "You can't move in this state." "Go," he said firmly. "Find Colonel Harrison. He has the authority to detain Miller and protect the Lakota. I won't leave him here." "Grace," his voice took on that commanding tone she knew so well. "Your mother always said that true love requires sacrifice. Let me do that. Let me try to right some of the harm I've caused." The sounds outside got closer. Mary, who was watching through the small basement window, whispered, "They're surrounding the chapel." Grace looked at her father, feeling the weight of the decision in her heart. The Brave Spirit medallion seemed to pulse against his skin, as if the spirits of his Lakota ancestors were guiding his path. "There is a passage," said Mary suddenly, "under the sacristy floor. Robert used it to hide supplies during the war." The commander nodded. "Go. I'll keep them busy here." Grace kissed her father's forehead, her tears falling onto his face. I'll be back with help, he promised. I know you'll be back, he replied with a weak smile. You were always stronger than me. Mary guided Grace through the narrow passage, which ran beneath the chapel, until she emerged amidst a group of rocks about 50 yards away. As they crawled through the dark tunnel, they heard voices and footsteps above, and then Sheriff Miller's voice echoing through the night. Commander Thompson, we know you're in there. It doesn't have to end like this. When they finally emerged from the tunnel, Grace and Mary ran in a crouch to where they had left the horses. The sound of gunfire exploded into the night, followed by screams and the crash of breaking wood. No! Grace tried to turn back, but Mary held her with surprising strength. Your father has made his choice, the older lady said firmly. Don't let it be in vain. Heartbroken, Grace mounted her horse. The tribal medallion glinted in the moonlight as she raised it to her lips, murmuring a prayer in Lakota that brave spirit had taught her. Where to now? Asked Mary, already sitting next to him. Grace looked north, where she knew brave spirit and the refugees would be traveling under cover of night. Then east, where Colonel Harrison represented the only hope for justice. East, she decided, though every fiber of her being longed to ride in the opposite direction. We need to get to Colonel Harrison before it's too late. As they rode through the night, leaving behind the sound of gunfire and the orange glow of flames that began to consume the chapel, Grace held the locket like a talisman. In him all the paths of his life converged: the love for his father, his commitment to justice, and the unexpected but deep love for a Lakota warrior who taught him the true meaning of courage. The full moon lit her path across the South Dakota prairies, and Grace Thompson rode toward her chosen destiny, no longer torn between two worlds, but determined to build a bridge between them, even if the price was greater than she had ever imagined paying. Dawn found Grace and Mary riding toward Colonel Harrison's camp, their horses exhausted from the night's journey. Her father's sacrifice in the chapel weighed on Grace like a shadow, but the tribal medallion against her chest gave her the strength to carry on. Each hoofbeat brought them closer to their only hope of saving both their father and the Lakota refugees. There! Exclaimed Mary, pointing to a column of smoke on the horizon. It must be the military camp. Grace adjusted the reins, her aching body protesting every movement. The last 24 hours had been a torrent of emotions and dangers that had left her physically and emotionally exhausted. But there was no time for rest, not while Miller and his men still posed a threat. Colonel Harrison proved to be exactly as his father had described him, a man of imposing presence, but with gentle eyes that revealed a wisdom acquired through years of observing the injustices committed against the native peoples. Miss Thompson, he said after hearing her urgent report, your father has always been a complex man. That he chose this moment to redeem himself, well, perhaps the spirits of this land work in mysterious ways. Colonel, Grace leaned forward, her hands clutching the locket. Miller and his men won't stop. If we don't act quickly— I understand the urgency, Harrison interrupted, rising from his campaign chair. And I admire your courage in coming here. Captain Reynolds? A young officer quickly entered the tent. Sir? Prepare the men. We leave immediately for Cedar Springs, and send a detachment to intercept any groups moving toward the northern border. As the military camp came to life with preparations, Grace felt her heart torn between two directions. To the north, Espirito Valente and the refugees continued their dangerous journey. To the east, his father was possibly still fighting for his life in the burning chapel. Go, said Colonel Harrison, surprising her. I know your heart pulls you north. I will personally handle the situation with Miller and ensure your father's safety. As a slight smile curved the colonel's lips. I recognize the medallion you carry, Miss Thompson. It is a sacred symbol to the Lakota. If someone has entrusted it to you, then your destiny is intertwined with theirs in a way that goes beyond our understanding. Grace felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything." "Mary will stay here," he continued. "She knows the terrain and can guide my men. Now go, while there is still daylight." With a fresh horse provided by the Colonel, Grace headed north. The medallion seemed to pulse against her chest as if it were guiding her across the vast prairies. Spirit Valente's words echoed in his mind. "Where 3 stone arrows point to the sky." For 2 days she rode, following the signs he had taught her to read. Branches broken in a specific way, stones arranged in meaningful patterns, markings that to the untrained eye would appear natural, but that told a story to those who knew how to interpret them. It was in the twilight of the 2nd day that she saw them, 3 rocky peaks that rose against the sky like arrows pointing to the rising stars. And there, protected by natural rock formations, he found the camp. Silent Moon was the first to see her, running towards her with a cry of joy that attracted the attention of the others. And then, emerging from among the makeshift tents, was Espirito Valente. Their eyes met across the distance that separated them, and in that moment, all the tiredness, all the pain, and all the fear of the last few days dissolved. Grace dismounted, her legs shaking not just from the exertion of the journey. "You're back," he said simply, his voice thick with restrained emotion. "I promised I'd come back," she replied, touching the locket around her neck. He moved closer, his eyes studying her face as if searching for signs of what had happened. "Your father?" Grace felt the tears she had held back throughout the journey finally spill over. He chose the path of redemption." His voice cracked as he told of the events in the chapel, of Colonel Harrison, of the hope for justice that finally seemed possible. Brave Spirit wrapped her in his arms, and there, finally, Grace allowed herself to fall apart. All the weight of the last few days, all the impossible choices and painful losses, found release in her sobs. "The spirits have guided you here," he murmured in Lakota, his lips close to her ear. "As you always knew would happen." When she finally calmed down, she realized that they had been surrounded by the other refugees. The children approached shyly, touching their clothes as if to make sure it was real. The older women nodded approvingly, as if an important circle had closed. "What happens now?" asked Grace, still in Espirito Valente's arms. "Now," he replied, "we have built something new. Not just for ourselves, but for all who come after. A place where arrows meet the sky, and where different paths can become one." The sun was setting on the South Dakota horizon, painting the sky with colors that resembled tribal medallion beads. Grace Thompson, daughter of Commander Thompson, who had once ordered the Wounded Knee massacre, was at home. Not on a ranch or in a pioneer town, but in the arms of a Lakota warrior, surrounded by a people who had learned to see beyond their differences. The medallion glowed in the twilight, no longer a symbol of division and loss, but a promise of unity and hope. And as the first stars began to dot the sky above the 3 rocky peaks, Grace knew she had found her true north, not in a place, but in a love that defied boundaries and healed old wounds like the very earth beneath her feet.